You know someone who beat addiction. Against all odds, they got clean and stayed clean. And you probably know someone else who tried everything: rehab, therapy, support groups, medication, and still couldn't do it. They're either still struggling or they're gone. What's the difference between these two people? Here's what nobody wants to say out loud. It's not about willpower. It's not about wanting it badly enough. It's not about hitting rock bottom or finding the right treatment program. Those things help, sure. But there's something deeper, something most people miss entirely, that separates the people who make it from the people who don't. The uncomfortable truth? Only one specific type of person consistently survives addiction long term. And it's not the ones you'd expect. It's not the people with the most support, or the most money, or the most motivation. It's not even the people who seem the strongest, or most determined. In fact, some of the most likely survivors look like complete disasters from the outside. This isn't about being judgmental or writing anyone off. This is about understanding what actually works versus what we've been told should work. Because the recovery industry has sold us a story about addiction that sounds nice, but doesn't match reality. And people are dying because we keep pushing solutions that only work for a certain type of person. What you're about to learn might challenge everything you believe about addiction and recovery. It might make you uncomfortable. It might even make you angry. But if you or someone you love is fighting this battle, you need to hear this. Because recognizing whether someone has what it takes to survive might be the difference between life and death. 1. They hit a breaking point. Not rock bottom, something different. Everyone talks about rock bottom like it's this magical moment where everything clicks and the person suddenly wants to get better. You hear it all the time in recovery circles. You have to hit rock bottom before you can start climbing back up. But that's not what actually saves people. Rock bottom is a myth that sounds good, but doesn't reflect reality. Think about what rock bottom actually means. It's supposedly the lowest point. The moment where things are so bad that change becomes inevitable. But here's the problem. For addicts, there is no bottom. Things can always get worse. Always. You can lose your job, lose your family, lose your home, lose your health, and still keep using. People overdose and die. That's the actual bottom. And they never recovered. The people who survive don't hit rock bottom. They hit something else entirely. A breaking point. And it's completely different. Rock bottom is external. It's about circumstances. Breaking point is internal. It's about something shifting in your mind that makes continuing impossible, regardless of how bad or not bad your circumstances are. This breaking point looks different for everyone, but it has common elements. It's a moment of absolute clarity where you see yourself with brutal honesty. Not just my life is bad, but I am destroying myself and everyone around me. And if I don't stop right now, I will die or lose everything that makes me human. It's not shame. It's not fear. It's cold, clear recognition of reality. Some people have this moment after their first arrest. Others have it after their 10th overdose. Some have it when they're still functional, still employed, still housed. The external circumstances don't determine it. What determines it is whether your brain is capable of that level of self-awareness and honest assessment. And not everyone's brain can do that. This is why some people keep using until they literally die while others quit before things get catastrophic. It's not about how bad things are. It's about whether you can see yourself clearly, and whether that sight is enough to override the addiction. Most people can't. Their brain won't let them. The denial is too strong, the rationalization too powerful, the addiction too deeply wired. The breaking point also requires a specific emotional experience. Not just recognizing you have a problem, but feeling genuine revulsion at what you've become. Not guilt, which addicts are experts at managing. Revulsion. The kind that makes you physically sick to think about using again. The kind that changes your identity from addict who wants to quit to person who cannot be that anymore. You can't force this. You can't manufacture it. Therapists try. Families try. They show you the consequences, confront you with the damage, try to make you see. But if your brain isn't wired to process that information in the right way, it just bounces off. You hear it, you might even agree intellectually. But it doesn't land emotionally. It doesn't create the breaking point. This is why intervention and forced treatment often fail. You can put someone in rehab, get them through detox, teach them all the coping skills, But if they haven't hit their internal breaking point, none of it sticks. They're just going through the motions, waiting to get out so they can use again. The external intervention didn't create the internal shift that actually matters. People who survive remember their breaking point with crystal clarity. They can tell you exactly when and where and what they were thinking. It's burned into their memory because it was the moment everything changed, not gradually, not through a process. In one moment, their relationship with the substance fundamentally shifted from "I need this" to "this is killing me and I choose life." And here's the crucial part. This breaking point creates something that connects directly to the next characteristic survivors share. 2. They accept complete responsibility. No more excuses, ever. After that breaking point, something shifts in how survivors think about their addiction. They stop making excuses. Completely. Not partially, not mostly. They take full, absolute 100% responsibility for their choices and their recovery. And this is incredibly rare. Most addicts are explanation machines. They have a reason for everything. Their childhood was traumatic. Their brain chemistry is off. They were prescribed painkillers. Their partner left them. They lost their job. They have mental health issues. Society failed them. The system is broken. On and on. And look, these things might all be true. Trauma is real. Mental illness is real. Circumstances matter. But here's what survivors understand that others don't. None of that matters for recovery. You can have the most valid reasons in the world for why you started using and why you kept using. But if you're waiting for those reasons to be resolved before you can get better, you'll never get better. Because there will always be reasons. Life will always be hard. Circumstances will always be imperfect. The people who make it through stop waiting for conditions to be right. They stop blaming their past, their brain, their situation, other people. Not because those things don't matter, but because focusing on them is a trap. It keeps you stuck in victim mentality where you're powerless. And you can't recover from a position of powerlessness. This acceptance of responsibility sounds harsh to people who don't understand addiction. It sounds like blaming the victim, but it's actually the opposite. It's empowerment. When you accept that you're responsible, you're also accepting that you have agency, that you can choose differently, that your recovery is in your hands, not dependent on external factors you can't control. Watch how survivors talk about their addiction versus how active addicts talk about it. Survivors use first-person active voice. I made bad choices. I hurt people. I was destroying my life. Active addicts use passive voice and external attribution. Things happened. I was given these pills. Life got hard. People let me down. The grammatical difference reflects a fundamental difference in mindset. This responsibility extends to everything. Survivors don't blame their relapses on triggers or stress or other people. If they slip, they own it completely. I made a choice to use. That was on me. Now I make a different choice. No elaborate explanations about why it happened. Just acknowledgement and immediate course correction. This is incredibly uncomfortable for the people around them, especially family members who've been enabling. Because when the addict takes full responsibility, it means others can't fix it for them, can't save them, can't control the outcome. The family has to sit with their own powerlessness, which is terrifying, so they often push back against this independence. But survivors hold firm. They stop letting other people take responsibility for their sobriety. They don't expect their partner to keep them accountable. They don't rely on their therapist to keep them clean. They don't wait for their family to provide the right support. They understand that this is their fight, and nobody else can fight it for them. This doesn't mean they don't accept help. They do. But there's a difference between accepting help and depending on help. Between using resources and expecting resources to do the work for you. Survivors use support systems as tools they control. They don't hand over responsibility to those systems. The blame game ends completely. Not just blame toward others, but also excessive blame toward themselves. Because self-blame is just another form of not taking responsibility. It's wallowing in guilt instead of changing behavior. Survivors skip past both external blame and self-blame straight to, this is the situation, these are my choices, this is what I'm doing about it. This mindset also means they stop making excuses to themselves. They don't tell themselves they can have just one. They don't negotiate with their addiction. They don't create elaborate justifications for why this time would be different. They see those thoughts for what they are, the addiction talking, and dismiss them immediately. And this absolute accountability creates the foundation for the next critical characteristic. 3. They completely change their identity, not just their behavior. Here's where most recovery programs get it wrong. They focus on changing behavior. Stop using. Avoid triggers. Learn coping skills. Attend meetings. Follow the steps. All of this is behavior modification. And behavior modification doesn't work long-term for addiction because it's fighting against who you believe you are. The people who survive do something more fundamental. They change their identity. Not their behavior first, their identity first. They stop being an addict trying not to use and become a person who doesn't use. That sounds like semantics, but it's everything. When you're an addict trying not to use, your identity is still addict. Using is what you do. You're just temporarily restraining yourself, fighting against your nature, using willpower to override who you are. That's exhausting and unsustainable. Eventually, the willpower runs out, or you convince yourself you've earned a break or something stressful happens, and you use, because that's what addicts do. But when you change your identity to person who doesn't use, using becomes inconsistent with who you are. It's not about willpower anymore. It's about being yourself. You don't use for the same reason you don't do lots of other things. Because that's not who you are. It would be weird and wrong and fundamentally incompatible with your sense of self. This identity shift is visible in how people talk about themselves. Someone still identified as an addict says, "I'm an addict, I'll always be an addict, I'm just choosing not to use today." Someone with a shifted identity says, "I don't do that anymore, that's not me, I'm different now." Past tense. Completed transformation, not ongoing battle. This doesn't mean denying you were addicted or pretending the risk isn't there. It means integrating the experience into a new identity, instead of letting it define you forever. I had an addiction and I overcame it, and now I'm someone who lives differently. The addiction is part of your history, not your present identity. This shift requires letting go of the addict identity, which is surprisingly hard. Being an addict becomes comfortable in a weird way. It explains your failures. It gives you a community. It provides a ready-made excuse for why life is hard. Letting that go means facing life without that buffer. You're just a person now, responsible for yourself, with no special status or explanation for struggling. Survivors are willing to make that trade. They'd rather be a regular person dealing with regular problems than an addict dealing with addiction problems. They'd rather have a hard day at work than a hard day staying clean. They'd rather face their issues directly than through the lens of addiction. They choose the difficulty of normal life over the difficulty of addiction. This identity change shows up in every area of life. They change who they spend time with. They change what they do for fun. They change their environment. They change their habits and routines. Not because a program told them to, but because their new identity requires it. The old activities and people and places are incompatible with who they are now. They also develop a story about themselves that makes sense of the change. Not a victim story or a hero story, but an honest story. This is who I was. This is what happened. This is who I am now. This is how I got here. The story integrates the past without being defined by it. It creates narrative continuity that supports the new identity. Physical changes often accompany this. They might change their appearance, get tattoos, or remove them, change their style, their hair, whatever signals the transformation. This isn't superficial. It's reinforcing the identity shift through visible markers, reminding themselves and showing others that they're different now. The people who don't survive never make this shift. They remain addicts who are trying not to use. They attend meetings and introduce themselves as addicts. They define themselves by their struggle. They wear their addiction as their primary identity. And because that's who they are, using remains a constant temptation. It's always there as an option because it's what their identity does. And this complete identity transformation connects directly to perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of successful recovery. 4. They isolate from their entire past, ruthlessly, permanently. This is the part that makes people uncomfortable, the part that seems extreme or unnecessary, but it's non-negotiable for survivors. They cut off their past completely, not partially, not gradually. They burn every bridge to their old life and everyone in it. And they don't look back. Every person who enabled them, gone. Every person who used with them, gone. Every person who reminds them of who they were, gone. Family members who can't accept the new them, gone. Friends who want the old them back, gone. Places they used to go, gone. Activities they used to do, gone. Everything that connects to their addiction gets severed completely. This sounds cruel. It sounds unnecessary. People say, but that's my family, or but they never used drugs, or but they were just trying to help. Doesn't matter. If being around them in any way makes sobriety harder, they're out. If they knew you when you were using, if they have expectations based on old you, if they trigger any association with that life, they're a liability you can't afford. Most people trying to recover don't do this. They try to maintain relationships. They try to prove to people from their past that they've changed. They try to heal old wounds and restore broken connections. And this kills their recovery. Because those relationships are soaked in history and patterns and dynamics that all lead back to using. Your brain has powerful associations. Person plus place plus emotional state equals craving. You can't just decide those associations don't matter. They're wired in. Being around the same people in the same places creates the same emotional states that preceded using. Your brain expects the pattern to complete. Fighting that expectation takes constant energy you don't have. Survivors understand this instinctively. They don't try to maintain old relationships out of obligation or guilt or hope. They recognize that survival requires a clean break. Starting over completely. Building a new life with new people who only know the new version of them. No history to overcome. No old patterns to fight against. This is why moving to a new city is so effective for people who successfully recover. Not because the new place is magic, but because it makes the complete break easier. Nobody knows your history. Nobody has expectations. You can be whoever you decide to be without constantly fighting against other people's memories of who you were. The isolation extends to information too. They stop following people from their past on social media. They block numbers. They don't check up on old friends to see how they're doing. They don't maintain any connection, however tenuous, to that old world. Because every connection is a potential thread that pulls them back. This is incredibly hard for families to accept. They want their person back. They want to be part of the recovery. They want credit for standing by them. But often, the healthiest thing for the recovering person is distance or complete separation. The family dynamics that existed during active addiction are toxic, even if everyone had good intentions. Parents especially struggle with this. They feel like they're being punished for trying to help. But the reality is that the parent-child dynamic with an addicted adult child is almost always dysfunctional. There's enabling, codependency, manipulation, guilt, all sorts of patterns that are incompatible with healthy recovery. Distance isn't punishment, it's survival. Friends from the using days are absolutely off limits, even ones who've also gotten clean, because you have a shared history of using together. Your friendship is built on that foundation. Getting together means reminiscing, which means thinking about using, which increases risk. Better to let those friendships go and build new ones based on who you are now. Even well-meaning friends who never used can be problems. They remember you as you were. They have stories and memories that keep you connected to that identity. They might say things like, remember when you, or you used to, that reinforce the old self. Survivors can't afford that reinforcement. This total isolation from the past is what allows the identity change we talked about to actually stick. You can't become a new person while surrounded by people who knew and remember the old person. Their perception of you, their expectations, their patterns of interacting with you, all of it pulls you back toward who you were. And this willingness to ruthlessly cut ties leads directly to the final and perhaps most important characteristic. 5. They build something bigger than themselves. Purpose that demands sobriety. Here's the final piece that separates survivors from everyone else. They find something they care about more than getting high. Not just something they like or enjoy. Something that gives their life meaning and purpose, and demands that they stay clean. Something big enough that losing it would be worse than the discomfort of sobriety. Most people in recovery focus on not using. That's their goal. Stay clean. Count days. Avoid relapse. But that's a negative goal. You're defining yourself by what you're not doing. You're running away from something rather than toward something. And you can only run away for so long before exhaustion catches up. Survivors flip this. They're not trying to avoid drugs. They're trying to build something that matters. A career, a business, a relationship, a family, a creative project, a cause. Something that requires them to be functional and present and reliable. Something that would be impossible to maintain while using. This isn't just distraction or keeping busy. This is genuine investment in something outside yourself. You care about it deeply enough that the thought of losing it is more painful than the thought of staying sober. The cost of using becomes higher than the cost of not using. The equation flips. For some people, it's their kids. Not just having kids, because plenty of addicts have kids and keep using, but truly taking responsibility for being a parent, being present, being reliable, being someone their kids can count on. That purpose demands sobriety in a way that wanting to quit for yourself never could. For others, it's a career they're passionate about. Something they're good at, that challenges them, that gives them identity and pride. Something where showing up high or unreliable would mean losing it. The work becomes important enough that using isn't worth the risk. For some, it's a relationship with someone they genuinely love and respect and don't want to lose. Not a codependent relationship, but a healthy one with someone who won't tolerate the addiction. Someone whose presence in their life matters more than the substance ever did. For others, it's creative work. Art, music, writing, building something. Work that requires clarity and focus and sustained effort. Work that's impossible to do while using. Work that becomes the thing they can't imagine giving up. The specific purpose matters less than having one. What matters is that there's something pulling you forward that's bigger and more compelling than the addiction. Something that makes you want to wake up in the morning. Something that makes life feel worth living without substances. This is why programs that only focus on not using have limited success. They're asking people to give up something that made life tolerable without offering something better to replace it. They're creating a void and hoping willpower is enough to sustain living in that void. It's not. Survivors don't live in a void. They live in a life full of purpose and meaning and things that matter. The drugs would interfere with that life. So they don't use. Not because they're strong or disciplined or have great willpower. Because using would cost them things they care about more. This purpose also provides structure and accountability. You can't just do nothing all day when you have a business to run, or kids to take care of, or projects to complete. Your life has demands that keep you moving forward. You don't have time to sink into the boredom and emptiness that often precedes relapse. It gives you identity beyond recovering addict. You're a parent, an artist, an entrepreneur, a coach. Whatever your purpose is, that becomes your primary identity. The addiction becomes a footnote in your story, not the main plot. This purpose also means you have something to lose. When you're at rock bottom with nothing, using seems like a reasonable option. What's the downside? Things are already terrible. But when you've built something meaningful, when you have a life worth protecting, the downside of using is enormous. That fear of loss is a powerful motivator. The people who don't survive usually don't have this. They might go through treatment, get clean for a while, but they don't build anything meaningful during that time. They're just not using, waiting, existing. And eventually, the emptiness and boredom and lack of purpose makes using seem appealing again. At least it was something. At least it filled the void. Survivors refuse to live in that void. They build. They create. They invest. They commit to things outside themselves. They make their life so full of meaningful activity that there's no room for addiction. Not because they're busier, but because they're more engaged with living. And that engagement with life, that commitment to purpose, that building of something meaningful, that's what keeps them alive when nothing else would. That's what makes them the type of person who survives. Look, I'm not here to sugarcoat this or give you false hope. The truth is, most people don't make it. Most addicts die or spend their entire lives cycling through treatment and relapse. And that's not because they're weak or don't want it badly enough. It's because they're missing one or more of these 5 characteristics. They never hit that internal breaking point. They can't take full responsibility. They won't change their identity. They refuse to cut off their past. They never find purpose bigger than themselves. And without all 5 of these working together, recovery is basically impossible. You can't fake these. You can't force them. Either someone has the capacity for this level of transformation, or they don't. And if they don't, all the rehab and therapy and support in the world won't save them. That's harsh, but it's real. The only thing you can do is recognize whether someone has these traits, and if they do, get out of their way and let them rebuild. If they don't, protect yourself, because you can't save them and trying will only destroy you too.